When was your gut feeling actually right? Growing up, I was always wary of my uncle on my dad's side of the family, not blood related. Even as a young child, I just knew that I didn't like being around him. He never gave me any reason to feel this way, and I never voiced it to anyone. As I grew older, my family moved away and I saw less of him. But anytime my extended family met for holidays, I would see him and avoid him. Couple years down the track, I was around 12 or 13 when my parents sat me and my older brother down and told us that my cousin, my uncle's daughter, had been up-ed and molested by him from a young age. This had all come to light when my aunt caught it happening, later found out she was abused by him too. Really wish my gut feeling hadn't been right about that one. Was driving. Got an odd feeling about this car behind me. No telltale signs. The lady wasn't texting or anything. So I moved lanes and got a car ahead of her. Rear-ended that car promptly at the next light. Twice. While delivering pizza to shady neighborhoods. Things didn't look right. I trusted my instincts and booked. Both times. No one ever called back to ask about their food never arriving. That's all the proof I need. Used to work in the ER. Had a man come in with ripping chest pain that started not but 30 minutes prior after he moved something heavy at his office. I knew he was going to die just by looking at him. Massive overwhelming dread just seemed to engulf me. I did his EKG and I hoped something would be wrong with it so we could get him a bed. His EKG was perfect. Not 5 minutes later he went into cardiac arrest on our waiting room floor. After running the code for 45 minutes. He didn't make it. He had a massive aortic dissection. There wasn't much hope. This was almost 3 years ago and I've seen more shit since then. But the memory is still burned in my mind. And it hurts knowing I was the last person to speak to him. Back when I was about 10 or 11 I asked my mother if we could take my grandmother out to lunch. She was kind of against it. But I kept insisting that I really wanted to see my grandmother and that she would want to go to lunch that day. While we were out at the mall after getting lunch with my grandmother, she started slurring her speech and became extremely confused. She was having a stroke. Luckily, my mom noticed what was going on and got her to the hospital within 20 or 30 minutes. Doctors said they were able to stop the stroke and she came out of it basically the same as she was before. Couple days after the fact, my mom told me I had basically saved my grandmother's life by making sure we went out to lunch with her that day. I had been living and working in Korea. And one day I was coming up out of a subway station and saw a man talking to another foreign woman. She had that polite, frozen smile on her face, the "why is this guy talking to me" smile. I walked up to her, linked my arm with hers, and said, "Hey, Sarah. There you are. Are you ready to go?" And just started walking. The guy followed us. But I sped up and made an abrupt turn into a coffee shop. We hid. And I saw him walk past, still looking for her. We ended up getting coffee and chatting for a bit. And I found out that he had followed her off the train. And had been getting increasingly aggressive for the last 10 minutes. I don't know what might have happened. But I'm really glad I interfered. Helped a victim of human trafficking get to a shelter. Context. I was a medical student at the time, now a resident, and the city my school was in is a hub for human trafficking. I noticed a patient in the ER who had a pretty bad injury to her face was with a sketchy looking guy who was not related to her. She wasn't my patient. But I brought my gut feeling up to her doctor who then made up some excuse to talk to the patient alone and got her to help. I never talked to her myself. But I couldn't shake the vibe I got from looking at her and the man she was with. When I was a kid, I was doing my first ever deep clean of my bedroom, getting rid of old clothes and toys and such. While cleaning out my closet, I found an old picture cut out from the local newspaper of Lyndon Johnson visiting my parents' hometown. The picture was taken outside with some locals in the background. I was going to throw the picture away, but suddenly got the strongest feeling not to do it. So I set it aside. Later I showed it to my mom and asked her about it. She freaked out and showed my grandma, who also freaked out. Turns out one of the locals in the background of the picture was my grandpa. He died when my mom was 12. That picture was one of only a handful we had of him. I had never seen a picture of him before this. When I was a kid I had this teacher, I think grade 3, who was really creepy towards all of us girls. We would notice him looking at girls' butts or down their shirts. He was really weird and always found a reason to make girls stay after class for whatever. He gave me a really terrible feeling that I had never gotten from someone before. I never got too close to him and always made sure I wasn't in his room alone. I'm 25 now and he just got arrested last year for having child pornography and was also caught with a hidden camera in his pen that he would take pictures down girls' shirts with. So creepy. Can't imagine the amount of videos pics this man has. He was an older man when he taught me in grade 3 and just got caught last year. When I was pregnant for the first time, something just felt off. I knew from the very beginning it wasn't going to end well. Few weeks later, I started cramping and spotting, which can be normal in early pregnancy. I ended up going to the ER. They couldn't find any evidence of a pregnancy in my uterus and decided it was a miscarriage and wanted to send me home. But that gut feeling that something was very wrong was still there, and I listened to it. I demanded that I be seen by my OB, who was head of obstetrics at that hospital, and wouldn't leave until he saw me. He had me in emergency surgery 4 hours after he came to examine me to remove my ruptured fallopian tube and stop the internal bleeding. Had I not listened to my gut, I'd be dead. Spent 2 years itching for no reason. Hypochondria. Gut told me it was cancer. Further research confirmed it for me. Told doctors for 2 years I had lymphoma. I was right. But they didn't figure it out until I was stage 4 advanced. When I was a young kid back in the 80s, I was playing on my front lawn when this van pulled up on the road and the sliding door opened. A guy about 19-20 aggressively waved at me to come to the van, and I immediately knew something wasn't right, so I ran inside and told my parents, and they freaked out and ran outside, but they were gone by then. Stranger danger wasn't really a thing back then, and I had no idea what an abduction was at the time, but looking back on it, my life could have ended that day had I chose to go over to the van. I often wondered after that day if they ever did get a kid to get into their van. Not me, but my wife. I had a work friend who used to come over to smoke blunts and play Xbox. I liked the guy even though I knew he was a bit odd. He was really good at Call of Duty and rolled a means blunt. He used to tell some tall tales that everyone knew were bullshit. Well, my wife, who was only my girlfriend back then, always got a creep vibe from him. She said he looked at her with so much anger and malice but never indicated any specific action that made her uncomfortable. After a while I stopped hanging out with the friend since he wasn't coming to town as much for work. Fast forward a few years and another mutual friend calls me to say the Xbox friend was killed by police. Unfortunately only after he had already killed his neighbor and his wife. Last year, I was staying up late watching Rick and Morty. My mom had been battling stage 4 metastatic breast cancer for a while. That night, she walked downstairs and just sat there with me until I decided to go to bed. I looked at her and in my heart I knew she was close to leaving. So I said goodnight. And she said goodbye. Which confused me. Until the next morning when my dad woke me up and told me she had passed away overnight. It still makes me wonder how we both knew. When my dad passed out in a bathroom at the airport, I told him to purchase an ED because they were selling them at the time at Sam's Club, 2007, for $1,000. I just knew it was an arrhythmia and I was right. He died a month later and if he had his ED he might have survived. It was an arrhythmia. I hadn't spoken to a certain friend for a couple weeks but got a gut feeling to contact and talk to her at a certain moment. I immediately messaged her. That's how we always talk. We talked for a couple hours and into the night. A month later, out of the blue she just messages me thank you. I asked her why she's thanking me. She said she was contemplating suicide on the day I got my gut feeling and had contacted her because she got to talk to someone on that specific day. She dropped the idea and hasn't attempted it again ever since. I was driving a back highway and got the urge to pull off and explore a tiny strip mall with dollar store etc. When I got back in my car there was a nasty multi-vehicle crash that closed the whole 4 lanes. Cold have been me. Had a gut feeling my sister relapsed in her drug alcohol addiction. Through the pandemic. We usually talked about once or twice a month. But we went a couple months without talking. I put it on my schedule to visit her. Turns out, not only did she relapse, but beat up her daughter for meth money. Tried to rob our parents. I had one of those something is very wrong feelings in my stomach many years ago when driving to work one morning. I couldn't shake it the whole way there. Though it wasn't a long drive. Made it to work and sure enough, the entire mood seemed just as off. Got to where I was to start my day and found out one of our supervisors had committed suicide earlier that morning. Found a new flatmate had killed himself a week after moving in. I advertised a room on our national buy-sell page. A guy replies and we meet a few times. Really nice French guy. Great English. Stable job and into the outdoors. He moves in on the Saturday. We talk over the next few days for no more than 5 minutes and passing around the house during the day. Friday Sat Sunday come around and I have not seen or heard him. But his door is shut. Either he was working nights and we just didn't sync up. I joked with my partner that he was a drug addict and was dead. But we both laughed it off. I mean, what are the chances? Sunday evening I follow through with my gut that something wasn't right and knock on his door. Worst case he's asleep and I wake him. Best case, he's not there. He killed himself 6 days after moving in. Police estimate he had been cold for 3 days. He had been suffering from serious depression and planned it all out. I felt so guilty for not seeing it but I barely knew him. Total of maybe 10 minutes talking total. School called us and during the 100% online school times and my class was freaking out cause why would they do that and my gut feeling was telling me it could have something to do with my friend who has been offline for 10 days straight and yeah it was that. One of my last weekends studying abroad in Costa Rica. My friend classmates wanted to go out drinking dancing. But I and the rest did not as we were tired. Friend convinced me to go as it was one of the last times we would get to. I didn't feel right the entire time I was getting ready. Just terrible gut feeling. As I was walking to the bus stop to meet him, a huge wave rushed over me and I thought I'm going to be robbed tonight. I wanted to turn around. But my friend saw me at the moment and we just continued on. We got kidnapped robbed that night. And it was terrifying. I will never ever not listen and react to my gut feelings again. About 7 years ago. Started having issues with urination. Some hip pain as well. Gut feeling. Need to get checked out. Might have cancer. Gut feeling absolutely bang on. Grade 3 prostate cancer. Now in remission. Reported just in time. I recently reported a co-worker to management sort of based on some worrisome things I saw. Combined with a gut feeling. Without going into a lot of detail. I saw some really subpar surgical prep. Now, I know people make mistakes sometimes but there was something about this person's work that made me feel sick to my stomach. I couldn't sleep the next night thinking about it. I have a strong suspicion the co-worker faked certifications and knowledge. Anyways, we will find out if my gut feeling is true. I didn't want to seem like a snitch. But when dealing with live patients, I feel a professional responsibility to say something before someone suffers permanent consequences. That my husband was talking to a girl I didn't much care for. I would never ask him to stop talking to someone. But he knew it bothered me. He said he wasn't talking to her. Long story short, in the middle of an argument he pulls his phone out to quote her and he changed her name in his phone. So yeah, I knew. Well, it was a gut feeling I ignored. I was getting ready to go meet a friend at a local bar. Some band was playing there. I had this feeling that I should stay my ass home. But all my buddies were already there. I go to start my truck and it's like the battery dead. I use my jumper box. Turns out it wasn't charged. So I ended up staying home. Next day I found out the place was victim of a drive-by shooting. And a couple people were injured. Anyways, that morning I still had to fix my truck. I jump in the bitch and it starts right up. Like nothing had happened. I always think about that night and how something made me stay home. When I was 13, we went to an outdoor school camp for a week. The week included an overnight canoe trip. I went with my best friend. And the morning of the trip I had a horrible feeling that things were going to go badly and that we should stay back, but I ignored it because I was 13. I was doing what I was told. Long story short, our boat hit a log jam. We went under. I came up. My best friend didn't. She died on the logs that day. Back when I was in high school, I was hanging over at a friend's house some 30 minutes away, playing on YouTube, when suddenly I had this terrible, gut-wrenching feeling and unexplainable sense of sadness. My friends were trying to console me after I said something about it. A couple minutes later her mom walks in and tells me that my dad called with bad news. That our pet dog had escaped the fence, ran into the street and was hit and killed by the mail truck. When I thought it was really odd that someone who I considered more attractive than myself showed interest in me. Didn't listen to my gut when it said something was wrong with the situation and ended up being data ped. I honestly thought it was my low self-esteem trying to sabotage me, but apparently not. A few years back I was dating a girl who went camping with a friend for a couple weeks. I didn't mind cause I trusted her. But I started to get a gut feeling she was cheating on me while she was gone. Shortly before she was supposed to come back into town she called and dumped me over the phone. Bonus points since I had literally just had brain surgery that she didn't bother to come back into town for. Comma edit. Should say dumped me for him. Was with my mom in the woods in eastern Quebec. I heard something break a rather large branch just over the hill, maybe 50 meters away. I told her we have to leave right away because I think it's a bear. She tells me how no bear's been in area for 20 years. She listens to me anyways and we go back down the mountain and home. Next day a bear was hit by a car just on other side of mountain. Last time I was hired for a job. Had it during the final interview with my soon-to-be boss. My gut told me to get fair even though everything about that job seemed great. To be fair, in the first few days it was. But then the reality of how poorly organized everything is came crashing down on me, and my enthusiasm for working in a toxic environment that was being fueled by boss's incompetence was gone. Ended up quitting after 2 months. Freshman year of high school. We had this really weird digital arts teacher. He'd go up and randomly massage a student's shoulders. And make comments like, "How about you and other student? Take your anger out in a mud pit?" Comma. Or similar things if students argued with each other. He was just genuinely weird. Standing over students. Mainly girls. And just very handsy. A few months into the school year, they transferred everyone out of the class. And we didn't see the teacher anymore. Some of us went to wood shop. Or metal work. etc. But that teacher was just gone. I don't actually know what happened to him. But I can only assume that what he was doing finally got to him. I was about to go to IT Tech. I spoke to a bunch of teachers there. None of them seemed to know anything about basic computer stuff. Part of me was thinking these people don't know what they're talking about. But maybe I'm just crazy. A month or two later, they shut down all the schools. When I decided not to go, my family berated me and called me lazy. I explained that school could not offer me any kind of education that would help me. None of them are computer literate, and though they could tell me what I wanted. PFFT. And the news came out. And I showed them. I was about 3 years old and we were being babysat by my great aunt Eleanor. She was really old and generally had no idea what was going on. She decided to take me and my little sister for a walk. My sister was in the stroller and I was just toddling along behind. And fell further back than my parents would have let me. Two 20-ish-year-old men were outside, about 2 houses down, with hammers, and they asked me if I also wanted to help them build some shelves. For some reason I got really scared. Like terrified. And I ran to catch up to Eleanor. I had nightmares about this for years and can remember it vividly. This neighbor then bought an old school bus and lived in his parents' backyard. Turns out, he was a child molester with a whole load of victims. I could have easily been one of them. Eleanor probably would have happily left me with them. I still think about that. I'm 14 and was all alone in a dirt path in India and some guy was just sitting on a rock in the middle of the forest. I didn't make eye contact but I could see he was crying. I wanted to help but my gut told me not to. 3 days later was caught for murdering his wife and 5-year-old daughter. There was one day I panicked really hard about going to university. Not sure for what reason. Nothing special happened. But it was correct. The bus did crash into another car. Right before the station. Unfortunately I had been forced to go anyway by mother. Hit my head in the bus windshield. Went to my statistics course with blood everywhere in my hair and some poorly cleaned glass shards because no one told me. Until the statistics teacher herself called the university's medical team on me, was sitting first rank because I don't see well from far away. 15 years ago, my wife and I were leaving the house to drive several hours to go see her brother. We both looked at each other and admitted that something felt off. No real reason. It just did. Weird, right? 2 cents hours later. Doing 70 odd mph eastbound on I-80 and a tire and wheel landed square in the middle of the hood of our brand new car. Right ducked our trip it did. My cousin introduced me to her friend and I told her I don't really like him, he seemed nice but he gives off a really weird vibe. I think I even avoided shaking his hand. I coughed into it and said sorry I need to wash my hands. Later found out she was dating him and he was abusive and threatened to kill her and was unhinged.